There is a specific kind of morning that changes everything, not a dramatic one, not one where the sky splits open or an angel appears at the foot of your bed. Just a morning where you did something so ordinary it barely registered. You got quiet, you got honest, you said something out loud to God that you had been holding in your chest for longer than you can remember, and you had no idea that what felt like nothing to you looked like everything to heaven. That's what I need to talk to you about today, because there's something happening right now that most people are going to miss entirely. Not because it's hidden, not because it's complicated, but because it doesn't look the way we were told it would look. The recalibration of heaven doesn't arrive with a press release. It doesn't show up as something you can screenshot and send to somebody. It shows up as a shift, a quiet but irreversible rearrangement of things that were locked in place, and it is happening in response to you. To something you did, to something you said, to a decision you made this morning or last week or in a moment you already half forgot because it felt too small to matter. I want you to stay, because somewhere underneath everything you've been carrying, there is a door. You know which one. You've walked past it so many times that you've learned how to look straight ahead when you approach it. You've developed a kind of muscle memory around not seeing it. You've built a whole life around not opening it. A career, a routine, a presentable version of yourself that moves through the world just fine, that nobody looks at and says something is wrong here. But the door is still there. It has always been there. And what I'm about to tell you is that what you did this morning, that small, quiet, barely noticed thing, is the reason that door is about to be opened from the other side. Heaven is recalibrating, and it started with you. I want you to hear something clearly before we go any further. You are not watching this video by accident. I know that sounds like the kind of thing people say, and I understand why you might want to skip past it, but I'm not saying it the way people usually say it. I'm not telling you that the algorithm delivered this to you as some kind of cosmic wink. I'm telling you that you are a specific person with a specific story, and the fact that you are still here, still seeking, still willing to open a video like this on a day like today, that is evidence of something. It's evidence that whatever God put in you has not finished pressing. So let me tell you what I see when I look at you. Not what I hope for you. Not a spiritual pep talk. What I actually see. You have been carrying something for a long time that you could never quite explain to the people around you. Not because it wasn't real. It was more real than almost anything else in your life. But because the moment you tried to open your mouth and put words to it, you could feel the gap between what you were trying to say and what they were able to receive. You'd start a sentence and watch their face and know before you finished that what you were saying was landing somewhere adjacent to what you meant. Not wrong exactly, just not quite it. So you learned. You learned to translate yourself. You learned to give people only the version that would fit inside their grid, the version that wouldn't make them uncomfortable or concerned or quietly dismissive. You learned to edit yourself in real time, automatically, without even noticing you were doing it. And you got very good at it. So good that sometimes you wonder if you've been translating so long you've started to forget what the original language sounded like. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from that kind of translation. It's not the exhaustion of hard work or long hours. It's the exhaustion of constant compression, of taking something that is wide and deep in you and pressing it down into a shape small enough to hand to someone without frightening them. You do it in conversations. You do it in meetings. You do it at dinner tables with people who genuinely love you. And nobody sees it happening because you've gotten so fluent at it that there's no visible effort anymore. It's just what you do. It's just who you've become in the presence of other people. You have been in rooms full of people who love you, rooms full of people who respect you, rooms where by every external measure you had every reason to feel at home. And you have sat in those rooms feeling completely unreachably alone. Not sad alone, not wounded alone, just different in a way you couldn't name out loud without sounding like you were complaining about a life that looked fine from the outside. And so you sat with it. You learned to sit with it. You learned to wear the expression of a person who belongs somewhere they don't fully belong. What does that do to a person over years? Over a decade? You start to wonder if the difference is a defect. You start to have conversations with yourself late at night. Not desperate ones, just honest ones, where you admit that you have never once, not fully, felt like you were in the right room. And then you talk yourself back from it because admitting it completely feels like a kind of ingratitude. And ingratitude feels like the wrong thing to bring to God when the life around you is, by most measures, not a disaster. There's a low-grade resistance that runs underneath your performance. You show up, you do the work, you meet the deadlines, you smile in the right places. But something in you has been sitting with its arms folded, unmoved by any of it. Not refusing to function, just refusing to call it what it is. Refusing to say out loud that this is not what I was built for. Because saying it out loud makes it real, and real means you have to do something about it, and doing something about it is terrifying in a way that's hard to justify to anyone who hasn't felt it. What is calling you? What has God been pressing into you with a consistency that your own effort cannot account for? Not the goal you set for yourself, not the reasonable plan. The thing underneath the plan. What is it? And can I tell you something? The resistance you've been carrying is not rebellion. It is not ingratitude. It is a signal. It has always been a signal. And the fact that you couldn't turn it off, the fact that you tried to be reasonable and grateful and present, and it just kept coming back, that's not a problem. That's how you know it wasn't coming from you in the first place. Because you tried to get rid of it, didn't you? You pushed it down. You talked yourself out of it. You had a good season and you thought maybe this is it. Maybe I was just being restless. Maybe I was just going through something. And then the morning came and it was still there. Unchanged, unmoved by all your reasonable arguments against it, still pressing, still waiting, still refusing to let you call this the whole story when you know it isn't. I need you to hear this. That is not your flaw. That is your design. You feel things in rooms before anything is said. You know when something is off even when everybody else is performing fine. You have a sensitivity that people in your life told you was a liability. They told you to toughen up, stop taking things so personally, stop feeling so much, be more practical, be more useful in the way the world measures useful. And part of you believed them. You tried. You genuinely tried to build a version of yourself that was thicker-skinned and more reasonable and less affected by things that most people seem to brush off without effort. But the sensitivity never left. And here's what I want you to understand about that. It was never a liability. It is equipment. It is equipment God built into you for a work that has always been coming, and the people who told you it was a flaw didn't know what they were looking at. They were not qualified to assess it. They were looking at the instrument and calling it a defect because they didn't know what the instrument was for. Now let's talk about what it actually means to be chosen. And I want to be very precise about this because the word gets used so casually that it started to sound decorative, like a nice thing to say to people who are struggling, a spiritual compliment, something you put on a coffee mug. That is not what I mean. That has never been what the text means. Before I say another word, I want to read you something, not as a church moment, not as a citation, as the sentence that I have personally staked everything on. God says to Jeremiah, a man who was terrified, a man who genuinely did not want the assignment, a man who said, I don't know how to speak, I'm too young, I'm not the right person for this. God says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Read that slowly. Before I formed you. That means before your first breath, before your first word, before your first failure, and your first prayer, and your first moment of doubting whether any of this is real, God knew you. Not knew about you, knew you. Intimately. Specifically. With full awareness of everything your name would eventually be attached to, and not only knew you, but set you apart. This is not a general announcement broadcast to all of humanity. This is precision language. This is God saying that you were not a late addition to a plan that was already underway. You were built into the architecture of the plan before the plan had a visible form. Though, we like to think we found God. We like to tell the story that way. I was lost, I was struggling, I hit something hard and I reached out. And that story is true. But the fuller story is that God was already there. God had already marked the place. Before you knew to look, you were already located. Before you were searching, you were already found. Paul says it this way in Ephesians, that God chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Before the first morning of creation. You were chosen. We were not chosen because we arrived with something impressive. We were not chosen because our record was clean, or our faith was strong, or our obedience was consistent. We were chosen because God chose to choose us, and the choosing happened before we ever showed up to have an opinion about it. And then John 15, Jesus is talking to his disciples and he says something that should stop us cold. You did not choose me. I chose you. I appointed you to go and bear fruit. That word appointed means placed, positioned, set in a specific location for a specific purpose and a specific outcome. You are not here by accident. You are not here by ambition or by circumstance or by the particular combination of choices that produced your current life. You are placed, and what God places, God tends. What God positions, God protects. What God appoints, God equips. Not before the assignment, but in the assignment. Not at the beginning, but along the way. Peter says it plainly. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, called out of darkness into his wonderful light, called out, extracted, pulled from one context and set down in another, not invited, called out. There's a difference. An invitation you can decline. A calling out is something else entirely. This is not flattery. This is a description of a condition you did not create and cannot dissolve. You are chosen not because you are exceptional in the way the world measures exceptional. This is not about talent scores or personality profiles or the kind of gifting people can point to and applaud in a room. You are chosen because God, in his precision and his sovereignty, looked at what needed to be done in the earth and determined that you were the right architecture for it, the right capacity, the right history, the right wounds, the right wiring. And here's what takes me to my knees every time I sit with it. God did not choose a polished version of you. He didn't choose the you that you might become after a few more years of growth and healing and getting it right. He knew you before you were formed. He set you apart with full knowledge of what you would do and what you would doubt and what you would resist and how long you would take and how many times you would walk past that door without opening it. And he set you apart anyway. The choice was made with complete information and it stood. We have all doubted the choosing. We have all looked at our own story and said, I'm not sure God had all the facts when he picked me. I'm not sure he saw what I would do with it, what I would fail to do with it, how long I would sit in the wilderness talking myself out of what he clearly said. We have all been there. The doubt is not disqualifying. The doubt is part of the story. But the choosing is not undone by the weight of it. The setting apart is not canceled by the confusion of it. The appointment stands. Now, I need to tell you about the wilderness. I need to tell you about it not to encourage you, but to be honest with you, because if I skip this part, I'm not serving you, and I'm not serving God's story any justice. There was a season in my life when I was so certain that God had simply moved on. I don't know how else to put it. The doors that had been open went quiet. The things that were working stopped working. Opportunities that looked like they were building towards something closed without explanation. The sense of God's presence that I had come to rely on, that nearness, that quality of knowing I was not operating alone, went still. Not for a month. For long enough that I started to genuinely wonder if everything I had believed about myself and about God and about the calling was something I had manufactured out of need, something I had assembled from my own desire because the alternative, a life without assignment, without purpose beyond what was visible, was too plain and too small, and I hadn't been able to accept it. I want to be honest with you about what I believed during that season that turned out to be wrong. I believed that God's silence meant God's absence. I believed that because I couldn't feel the movement, there wasn't any. I believed that the stripping away, the relationships that fell apart, the opportunities that closed, the version of myself I had been performing for years that suddenly didn't hold together anymore. I believed those losses were punishment. I believed I had done something wrong, made some wrong turn, missed some appointment, and was now living in the consequence of my own failure. I believed the wilderness was the result of something I broke. That is one of the most sophisticated lies the enemy tells. Because it uses real circumstances. It takes real pain and real silence and real loss and wraps a false interpretation around all of them. It says, you are in the dark because God is done with you. You are being stripped because you failed the test. You are alone because your assignment was reassigned to someone more reliable. I almost believed it completely. I came very close. There was a morning. And I can still feel the specific quality of the light in that room, the texture of the silence, the exact weight of what it feels like to be genuinely unconvinced that anything you've built your life around is real. There was a morning where I sat on the edge of my bed and I considered letting it all go. The calling, the conviction, the whole story I had been carrying about who I was and what I was here for. I almost decided to put it down quietly and walk away into something smaller and never speak of it again. The exhaustion of carrying something nobody else could see had finally become heavier than the fear of putting it down. And in that moment, not with a thunderclap, not with a vision, not with anything I could produce as evidence in a conversation, something in me that was not me said, "Not yet." Not yet. And I didn't move, not toward the calling and not away from it. I just stayed, because not yet is not a yes and it's not a no, it's a stay. And staying was the most I could manage that morning. Some mornings, staying is the whole act of faith. Some mornings, not walking away is the entire prayer. And God honors that. God counts that. The morning you didn't leave was a morning of obedience, even if it felt like nothing more than sitting on a bed with nowhere to go. God was not absent in that season. God was doing something in that season that required my stillness and my stripping. The relationships that fell apart were relationships that would have capped what I was about to carry. They were good relationships, not toxic ones, just relationships that belonged to the version of me that was passing away. The opportunities that closed were opportunities that would have taken me in a direction that looked like advancement but was actually a permanent detour. The version of myself that stopped holding together was a version I had constructed for other people's comfort, and it was not the architecture God needed for what was coming. Joseph didn't go from the pit to the palace on a straight line. Nobody handed him a document in the pit that said this betrayal is intentional, this imprisonment has a timetable, this suffering is producing something. And the faithfulness in the dark, the integrity, the refusal to compromise even when compromise would have made his situation more comfortable, the choosing of character inside circumstances that gave him no reason to maintain character. That was not separate from the calling. That was the formation of it. The pit was a classroom. The prison was preparation. The betrayal was part of the curriculum. And every year that passed in that cell was a year that God was building in Joseph, something that could not have been built in a more comfortable environment. The suffering was not a detour from the purpose. The suffering was the road to it. To spend 40 years in Midian, 40 years, after everything, before everything, 40 years of obscurity, 40 years of shepherding another man's flock in the middle of nowhere, 40 years of having nothing in his environment to suggest that he was anything other than a man who had failed spectacularly and settled into the most anonymous life available to him. And in those 40 years, God was doing something that could not have been done in a faster environment. The man who would lead a nation through a desert needed to first know the desert. The leader who would need to find water where there appeared to be none needed to learn what wilderness actually felt like from the inside. What did you lose in your wilderness? What fell away that you are still grieving? I am asking you to consider that what was removed was not taken from you. It was removed from your hands so that your hands could carry something heavier and more specific and more precisely aligned with what was always coming. The loss is real. Let it be real. The grief is real. You don't have to resolve it faster than it resolves, but underneath the grief there is a truth. What God strips from a chosen one in the wilderness is never wasted, not one thing. Not one loss, not one broken relationship, not one closed door, not one version of yourself that didn't survive. None of it was wasted. All of it was working towards something you are only now starting to be able to see. Now let me tell you about the signs. Let me tell you what marks someone who has been set apart for something specific. And I want to be clear, these are not compliments. Some of them are things you've spent years trying to explain away or get free from. The marks of the chosen are not all the marks that feel like gifts. Some of them feel like damage. And the difference between damage and design is not always visible from the inside. The first thing I see in someone who carries a genuine calling is a pressure, not excitement, not aspiration, pressure, like something sitting on the chest that won't let you settle, won't let you rest inside a life that's working fine by every objective measure, won't let you be satisfied with what should be enough. You've tried to name it, you've tried to diagnose it, You've gone looking for it in self-help frameworks and personality tests and quiet conversations with therapists who were genuinely trying to help. And every name you gave it didn't quite fit because it wasn't a psychological condition and it wasn't unresolved ambition. It was a calling with nowhere to go yet. There is an emotional depth in you that has always made ordinary environments feel expensive. You don't move through a room without picking up information that wasn't directed at you. You don't leave a conversation without carrying something from it that the other person doesn't know they gave you. You were told this was weakness. You may have been, somewhere along the way, by someone who meant well, genuinely convinced that the most useful thing you could do was to dull it, to find a way to feel less, to be the kind of person who moves through life without absorbing quite so much of it. But that depth is not a disorder. It is a tool. Specifically built into someone who would need to understand broken people, who would need to carry the weight of intercession, who would need to feel what others cannot feel in order to reach what others cannot reach. You have had moments of knowing that you cannot explain rationally, dreams that didn't feel like the ordinary processing of a sleeping mind, moments of clarity that arrived without invitation and refused to be filed under coincidence no matter how hard you tried. You've told very few people about these moments because the ones you told didn't have a container for it. And so you learned to carry them quietly, to let them sit, to trust that eventually the thing they were pointing at would come into view. What has happened in your relationships? Look at the people who were supposed to stay and didn't. Look at the pattern of betrayal and abandonment. Not one isolated incident, but a pattern that runs through your history in a way that is too consistent to be random. And I am not going to tell you that didn't hurt because it did. Deeply. Some of those departures cost you something that took years to even fully feel, let alone recover from. But look at what happened after each one. You didn't stop. You bent. You contracted. You learned to hold people more carefully, to extend trust more slowly. But you didn't stop moving. And in almost every case, the people who left could not have gone where you were going. They were not built for it. The clearing felt like loss in the moment. It was preparation in the architecture. There is a burden in you for other people, not a comfortable goodwill. A burden for the ones who are breaking, for the overlooked, the dismissed, the ones sitting in the version of the room you know from the inside. You feel it like weight in your chest when you encounter real suffering, even suffering that has nothing to do with you, even suffering in strangers on a screen. You are built to go in. That is not comfortable, but it is assignment. The loneliness you've experienced, not the circumstantial kind, not the ordinary ache of missing someone. The loneliness that doesn't resolve when you're surrounded by people. The loneliness that comes from carrying something no one else in the room can see, that sits in the center of your chest even in your most crowded moments. That loneliness is not a wound that needs healing. It is a space that was carved out for a specific intimacy with God that only develops in people who have genuinely run out of human substitutes. It was always carving towards something. The emptiness that human company could never fill was a capacity, not a deficit. And even in your deepest doubts, even in the seasons when you walked away from everything you said you believed, when you were living in a way that would give no one reason to point at you and say, "There goes a person set apart," the hunger came back. You didn't manufacture it. You tried, actually, to leave it behind. And it came back anyway. An appetite for God that returned even after everything you did to suppress it. That is not your willpower. That is the God who chose you before you were formed, refusing to let you walk away from what he put in you. You survived things that had no business leaving you standing. The moments where the math didn't add up to your survival and you survived anyway. The situations where by every reasonable calculation something essential in you should have been permanently broken, and instead something was produced in you that couldn't have been produced any other way. You are still here. You are still here. That is not luck. That is a hand that would not let go. People come to you in ways they can't fully explain, even strangers. Even people who have every reason to be guarded. There is something about you that opens people up, that creates a safety they weren't looking for and didn't know they needed. And you have sometimes found it exhausting because you don't always know what to do with what they bring. But that quality is anointing in a life that hasn't fully deployed yet. When you step into what you were made for, that quality stops being exhausting. It becomes the mechanism of the work itself. And then there is the private knowing. the thing underneath everything else. It was there before the calling had a name, before you had language for God, before you had any framework for any of this. A knowing that has always said this is not the whole story. Something has always known it, even when the life around you gave you no evidence for it, even on the days when you were so far from what you believed yourself to be that the knowing felt more like a taunt than a promise. It never left, not one time. Not for a season, not for a crisis, not for a decade of walking in the wrong direction. It was always there, unchanged, unmoved, unimpressed by any of your arguments for why it should go quiet. It was always there, and it was never going to go away. That is not you. That is God. Now I need to talk to you about obedience. And I need to do it honestly, because I have not been obedient every time I should have been. I have done exactly what you've done. I have stood at the edge of the thing and found a reason to step back. I have looked at what God was asking and said, not yet. And I did not mean not yet in the way God means not yet. I meant I am afraid, and afraid is easier to name as timing than it is to name as fear. I want to talk about something very specific, the thing God has been calling you toward that you have been circling. Not your general sense of purpose, the actual thing, the specific step, the concrete, nameable, no more excuses thing that, if I asked you right now, your stomach would recognize before your mind had a chance to respond. You've always known. You've known for longer than you've been willing to admit out loud. And I want to ask you honestly, what is actually holding you back? Not the official reason, not the reasonable version you've been telling yourself when the question surfaces at 2 in the morning, the real reason. Because here's what I found. And I say this as a man who spent years inside his own carefully constructed delay. The reasons we give ourselves for not moving are almost never about capability. They are almost never genuinely about resources or timing or circumstances. They are almost always about fear wearing the costume of wisdom. I know what it feels like to be called to something that requires a version of you that you have not yet become. I know what it feels like to look at what God is asking and think, I am not the right person for this. If the people I'm supposed to reach could see what I've actually been through, what I've actually done, the places I've actually been, they would not be looking to me. I have carried that specific lie across platforms and through private rooms and into conversations where I was supposed to be the person with something to offer, and I was standing there as nothing but a man who knew exactly how badly he didn't measure up to the thing being asked of him. And God just kept pressing, not loudly, not dramatically, but with that specific, unmistakable, unreasonable pressure that doesn't care about your objections. The same pressure that found Gideon hiding in a winepress, threshing wheat in secret so the Midianites wouldn't see him. He wasn't standing on a hill making grand plans. He was hiding. He was afraid. He was doing everything available to him to stay small and invisible and safe. And the angel of the Lord appeared and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." While he was hiding, present tense, already, not potential, not what you could be if you get yourself together. Thou, you warrior, that is who you are right now. While you are afraid, while you are hiding, while you are coming up with reasons why it isn't time yet. Because God doesn't call you by what you are performing. God calls you by what he placed in you. And the gap between those two things, between who you are performing and who God called, that gap is not an indictment. That gap is the invitation. You almost started. There was a moment. Maybe there were several. A moment where you had the idea half formed, the page half built, the conversation mapped out, the thing almost begun. And something stopped you. Or nothing stopped you, and you stopped yourself. And you told yourself you'd come back when you were ready. When you had more clarity. When the timing was better. When you were in a more stable place. When you knew it would work. Here's what I need to tell you. Readiness is not a condition you achieve before obedience. Readiness is a product of obedience. You don't become ready and then move. You move, and the moving produces in you what you thought you needed before you could move. Every single person in Scripture who stepped into something significant did it before they were ready. Moses argued with God from inside a miracle. Esther went before the king knowing it might be the last thing she did. Peter stepped out of the boat before he had any framework for walking on water. The readiness came in the stepping, not before it. And I want to name something else. The fear is real. I'm not dismissing it, but I need you to see what is at stake on the other side of it. There are people who are waiting on the other side of your obedience. Real people. People who are in the version of the dark that you know from the inside. People who will not be reached by what can currently reach them. People who need the specific frequency of what you carry, not a general spiritual broadcast, not a polished ministry package, but the specific thing God put in you, shaped by the specific history you have, earned through the specific suffering you've been through. Those people are not abstract. They are real, and they are running at a time waiting for what you carry. What you are holding is not just yours. It was never just yours. 3 excuses. I've used all 3. I still catch them surfacing in me sometimes, and I have to recognize them by name before they can do what they always try to do. I'm going to name them plainly. The first one, I'm not qualified. I haven't been trained, credentialed, positioned by the right people. I don't have the platform or the following or the endorsement of anyone whose endorsement would make me feel more legitimate. And to that I say, who credentialed Moses for the burning bush? Who qualified the disciples before Pentecost? Who handed David a document before he walked toward Goliath? The qualification for what God calls you to is the life you have lived and survived and been shaped by. Your story is your credential. Your wilderness is your curriculum. And the degree God is most interested in is the one you earned in seasons you survived that nobody gave you credit for. The second one, I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if anyone will respond, if it will land, if the effort will produce anything worth the risk. And to that I say, you are not responsible for outcomes. You are responsible for obedience. The fruit is not your department. Your department is the seed. God has never asked a person to guarantee the harvest before putting the seed in the ground. He asks for the seed. He handles the harvest. He manages the soil. He controls the weather. Your job is to plant what he put in your hand and trust that the ground he chose already knows how to receive it. The third one, what will people think? The people who knew me before, who watched me fail, who built a small and certain story about what I'm capable of, what happens when I step into something that contradicts what they decided about me. And to that I say, they decided wrong. They looked at where you were and made a judgment about where you were going. They looked at a season and called it a summary. And God's word over your life does not require their cooperation to be true. Not one person's cooperation, not one person's belief, not one person's blessing. God spoke before he formed you. The people writing small stories about your ceiling were not in the room when your assignment was given. They were not consulted. Their vote does not count. Move. Move with the fear in your body if you have to. Move trembling if you have to. Move without knowing exactly how it ends. But move. The morning I finally started, the actual morning, the morning I stopped circling and began. I was not ready. My voice was shaking in ways I could hear on the recording. I felt like a fraud with a microphone. My whole body was resisting in a way I couldn't talk down with logic. I felt like at any moment someone with actual authority would show up and explain to everyone present that I was the wrong person for this. And I had to remind myself over and over, it's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about whether I feel like the right person. It's about the fact that God said go, and I have exhausted every legitimate reason to stay where I am. That is what obedience looks like from the inside. It doesn't look like confidence. It looks like shaking and moving at the same time. It looks like pressing record when everything in you wants to close the laptop and come back to it tomorrow. It looks like sending the message before you're sure it's the right message. It looks like beginning before you're ready because waiting for ready is just another name for the same fear you've been carrying all along. It's going to work. It's going to work. God's hand is on it and it is anointed, not because you have it all together, but because you said yes. And yes, even a shaking yes, even an embarrassed yes, even a I don't know what I'm doing. Yes. That yes is what heaven has been waiting for. Move anyway. Now I want to pray with you. And I want you to say this out loud if you can. Not as a performance, not as a formula, but as a real conversation with the God who knew you before he formed you. Say it like you mean it. These words only work if you do. Father, I receive what you say about me over everything I have believed about myself. I receive the identity that was established over me before I drew my first breath, before I made my first mistake, before anyone had a chance to decide what I was worth or where my ceiling was. I am chosen, not because of what I have accomplished, not because of what I have maintained or performed or survived without falling apart. I am chosen because you chose me with complete information and the choosing stood. And I receive that today not as an idea but as a fact. I am going to build my next steps on. I declare that the voice that told me I was too small, too broken, too late, too damaged, too much, or not enough for what you placed in me. That voice is not the authority. It was never the authority. I have been giving it authority it never had, lending it credibility it didn't earn. And starting from this moment, starting from this prayer, I am done. I do not consent to its interpretation of my story anymore. I surrender the fear that has been dressed up as wisdom. I release the excuses I have been holding on to like a lifeline, the not ready, the not qualified, the what will people think. I open my hands. I let it go. God, I surrender the specific fear of stepping into what you have been calling me to, the fear of being seen before I feel prepared, the fear of failing where people are watching, the fear that I will say yes and then be found insufficient for what yes requires. I lay it down. Right now, I open my hands and I let it go. I step into what God placed me here to carry. I name it as real. I name it as active. I name it as mine, not because I earned it, but because God said it before I was formed, and God does not take back what he says. I step forward now. Not when I feel ready, not after one more confirmation, not when the circumstances line up in a way I can point to and feel certain about. Now. This decision is made and I am not taking it back. God, I ask for covering over what I am stepping into. Protect what is new. Protect what is just beginning. Guard the tender, early stages of this against the voices that will come against it, including the voice in my own head. Go before me into the rooms I haven't entered yet. Prepare the people who are waiting for what I carry. And give me the courage to keep moving even in the seasons when I cannot feel you moving. Because I know now that your silence is not your absence. I know that the wilderness was not abandonment. I trust you with what I cannot yet see, with what I cannot yet hold, with what has not yet arrived. You are chosen. I said it at the beginning, and I'm saying it now from the other side of everything we've walked through together in this conversation, and it carries a different weight now. It should. You have just agreed to something. You are chosen. What God placed in you will not be silenced by time or by fear or by the opinions of people who were never consulted about your assignment. The wilderness is behind you. Not because it was easy, and not because you navigated it perfectly, and not because you came out of it without scars. It is behind you because you are still here. Still breathing, still watching, still willing to sit with a question about your calling on a day when you could have watched something else entirely. That is not a small thing. That is a person who has not let go of what God said, even when letting go would have been so much easier. And that door, the one you've been walking past, the one you've developed muscle memory around not seeing, the one you built a career and a routine and a whole presentable life around not opening, someone has been standing on the other side of it this entire time. Waiting, with authority, with resources, with an assignment that is specifically connected to yours in a way that cannot be accessed until you move toward it. What you did this morning, that quiet, honest, barely noticed thing you did before you found this video, that was you putting your hand on the handle for the first time in a long time, and heaven registered it. Not someday. Today. The recalibration has already begun. It doesn't look like lightning because it was never going to look like lightning. It looks like a door that has started to move. Walk toward it. One more thing before you go, and I want to say it simply because it is simple. What happens next is going to look ordinary. It is going to look like sending an email or making a call or sitting down in front of a camera or a page or another person and just beginning. It is going to look like the kind of start that nobody would look at and say something significant is happening here. But significant things almost never announce themselves at the beginning. They begin as small acts of obedience that only reveal their weight in retrospect. You won't feel the significance of today until later. That is fine. Move anyway, and you are not going to feel ready. I need you to know that in advance so that when the feeling of unreadiness comes, and it will come, It will come the moment you try to actually begin. You don't confuse it with evidence that you're in the wrong place. You are in exactly the right place. You are just at the beginning of it, and beginnings are allowed to be uncomfortable. Beginnings are supposed to be uncomfortable. The discomfort is not a red light. It is the resistance that proves the thing is real and the cost is real, and what you are walking into actually matters. If what we talked about today landed somewhere in you that needed to be reached, if something in this conversation named something true that you have been carrying without language, I want you to drop something in the comments. Not for the channel, for yourself. Because the person who types even a single word is the person who says out loud, I was here, I heard this, and I am not going back to the life I was living before this conversation started. That declaration matters more than you know. There is something in the act of saying it outside your own head. Even in a comment, even in a single sentence, that seals something that was previously unsealed. Let it be recorded. Let it be real. You walked into this conversation with a door you had been learning not to see. You walked in, carrying something you had been telling yourself maybe wasn't really there, maybe was just wishful thinking, maybe was just the kind of story you told yourself to get through the hard seasons. I want you to walk out knowing it's there. It has always been there. It was never not there. And the God who put it there never forgot it, never moved on from it, never looked at you in your longest season of silence and decided the investment wasn't worth maintaining. He recalibrated toward you. He has always been recalibrating toward you. That is what heaven does with the ones it chose before the foundation of the world, not the ones who performed perfectly, not the ones who never doubted or never hid or never sat on the edge of a bed and considered putting it all down. The ones who stayed, the ones who, when they had nothing left to offer, offered their staying. The ones who said not today to walking away, even when they didn't have the energy to say yes to moving forward. That is who you are. That is what you did this morning, and nothing in heaven is the same because of it. Go. It's time.